Continuing off last week's discussion about Thomas's dynamic characters, I wanted to take this opportunity to talk about who is the definitive greatest character of them all. You're probably thinking, duh, it's Thomas, the one the show's named after. No, you'd be wrong. Thomas's face may be plastered in every episode, and he may be the show's main character, but he's absolutely not the greatest or the most important. So now you're probably thinking, it's Edward then, the first character created. And while, yeah, what Edward represents is pretty damn wonderful, he's not the greatest. The greatest character in the entirety of the Thomas franchise is Stefano the boat truck tank crane thing. Seriously, what the hell is this? No, I'm just kidding. The greatest and most important character in Thomas is Gordon the Big Engine. If you all follow me on Twitter, you'll have seen me talk about this before, so this video may not be a shock to you. Gordon is the franchise's strongest character, the greatest engine conceived by Wilbert Awdry, and I'm going to explain why. There's two reasons. The first one is really simple. He's visually iconic, literally. Gordon is an LNER A1 class, the same class of engine as Flying Scotsman, the most famous steam engine in the world. This is the exact visual people think of when they think of a British steam engine, or hell, a steam engine in general. If you ask anyone to think of what a steam engine looks like, more than likely what they're going to think of is a big long engine with a tender pulling a long rake of coaches. This type of engine is just iconic, and so just on looks alone, Gordon is too by association. He is a character that will always come to people's minds and is probably one of the first three people can name when asked to name the characters. The second reason is a hell of a lot more in-depth and meaningful than that. Gordon is the greatest character because he had the most significant journey of any character in the series, and this is what I want to shed light on today. I'm talking mostly about the books, so we'll start there. For those who are new here, Thomas is based on a book series called The Railway Series, written by Wilbert Awdry. If you haven't read it, then turn this video off right now and go find them online. This collection is our f***ing Bible. You can't call yourself a Thomas fan if you've never read them. Now, there is no flat-out main character in the Railway Series. It is very much an ensemble cast. Each book is usually about someone else. It's a variety of tales about this fleet of engines on this railway. But every series, any story, needs one character the audience relates to and follows. A protagonist. What is a protagonist? A protagonist is someone in a story the audience follows the whole journey of, from start to finish. Someone the audience experiences the world through, learns through, and has the ultimate, most complete character arc by the end. The character who is in the most different place than where they were when the story first started. You're probably thinking, duh, that's Thomas. He's the most famous one. While that's true, Thomas wasn't introduced until the second book, and by the end of that, his character arc was basically complete. There's a lot of stories with Thomas after that, sure, but he never drastically grows or changes as a character. Most Thomas stories are just about him screwing around on his branch line. Hell, Thomas barely appears in the last half of Wilbert's books. After book 18, he appears a grand total of 3 times, one of which is just a quick mention with no dialogue. It was clear after a certain point Wilbert had nothing more to say about Thomas, but still plenty more to say about other characters, like Gordon. Gordon was built in 1922. The first book takes place in 1923, shortly after he arrived on the railway. He's depicted here as young, eager, boastful, rude as fuck, and a total hotshot. In the very last book, which is roughly 90 years later in 2011, he humbly retires. A full character journey. Let's start from the beginning. Gordon is very flawed at the beginning of his journey. He is literally the newest thing in express steam at the time, and his pompous behavior reflects that. All of Gordon's stories in about the first half of Wilbert's books or so are all about Gordon learning some sort of lesson, always the hard way, and they're all at the result of him being full of himself and getting his comeuppance. All are events that humble him in some way, the biggest being when he gets himself into the most trouble he's ever been in, when he runs himself off the turntable into a ditch to avoid pulling a train and gets the express taken away from him. He also gets stuck on a hill, bursts his safety valve, loses the express when he's sent down the wrong line, gets shut up in the shed when he tries to go on strike, breaks his whistle, loses his dome, and gets stopped in his tracks by a fucking cow. There's a lot of these types of stories at the beginning of his arc, and fewer later because Gordon grew. He learned from his mistakes and matured over time. In the later half of Wilbert's books, you'll notice these types of Gordon stories get a lot further in between. The last one ever is Wrong Road, where Bill and Ben give Gordon a good scare. The later Gordon-centric stories are more emotional and grounded. The token later Gordon story is Tenders for Henry, where Gordon learns the fate of his brothers on the mainland. I want to specifically call this one out. This is a huge realization moment in the series, one where events in real life influence the story drama. Knowing your siblings are all being scrapped, killed, and left for dead, and that you can do nothing about it is enough to scare any engine and any reader. It is the harshest truth the series has ever presented to its audience, the concept of death and the loss of a family member. Wilbert chose Gordon to be the character to learn this terrible truth, the vessel for the audience. He could have used Thomas, or James, or Edward, or any of the others who also all lost their siblings. But no, he specifically chose Gordon. Wilbert wanted Gordon to be the one to vessel this incredibly important story beat in the Railway series. A story beat for our protagonist. Also in the same story, we meet Flying Scotsman, Gordon's only surviving brother. We meet his family basically, and a lot of time is spent on this. Gordon is the only one of the main characters we essentially meet the family of and really learn the roots of.
When I was young and green, he said, I remember going to London. Do you know the place? The station's called King's Cross.
Is it ever mentioned in any story what railway Thomas even came from before Sodor? Nope, never. Let's skip ahead to the Chris Awdry books. In Chris's first book, which takes place in the 1980s, he very firmly establishes that Gordon is middle-aged now. He's not a super eager, pompous hotshot anymore. He's a full-on grown adult, and starts dealing with problems that come with his age, his next stage of life. The story triple header sets up that Gordon is out of breath, and the idea is teased that Gordon may be replaced one day. This idea is followed through on in a later book, Gordon the High-Speed Engine, where Gordon is legitimately threatened by the idea of an HST taking his job. He tries what he can to prove himself, and after several incidents, finally does. He wins the battle, but not the war. The looming threat of replacement and retirement is still there. And in the final book of the series, Thomas and His Friends, this actually finally happens. The Fat Controller retires Gordon from the Express, and Pip and Emma, the HST, take it over. This is such a crazy moment, and of course we expect Gordon to go ballistic over it. But he doesn't. We are 90 years later on at this point, and Gordon has grown so much as a character that he humbly accepts it as an honorable old man. And look at that. The Railway series ends here. The series starts right after Gordon arrives and his life begins, and it comes to a close when his career concludes. The protagonist's character arc is complete. No need to continue. Absolutely poetic. In the same way the Star Wars saga overall is Anakin's story, the Railway series is Gordon's. I don't think it was Wilbert's intention to make Gordon the series' protagonist. I think it just worked out that way as he went along and realized Gordon was the one that he had the most to say about. And Chris continued it and brought it home to a beautiful close. Now let's look at the TV show. Now there are a lot of differences between the books and the show. The book started out as a series of simple bedtime stories for kids, but as Wilbert kept writing, he kept looking more at real-life influences, and the series became more of a love letter to trains than stories just for kids. The books matured in real time with the young audience it started with. You also have to take into consideration that the Railway series took 27 years to fully come out. The kids who started with the series at the beginning were adults by the time it ended. So as its fanbase got older, having a younger character like Thomas so prominently in the spotlight became less and less a priority. Now a TV show is a different story. Thomas and Friends the show was always aimed at kids and it never deterred from that. In a visual medium, you need a main character the target audience can see themselves in and visually experience the world with. As it was aimed at a young audience, a young character was more necessary. Thomas was also the most popular character in the books, hence making the show about him seemed like a natural choice. But most popular doesn't mean most important. Now, how does Gordon fare in the TV series? Unlike the books, Gordon has no conclusive character arc that ends because the show keeps on going. However, he does manage to stand out against all the others and always has. For starters, in any era, he always has had the gnarliest crashes and took the most damage of anyone. Our eyes were always drawn to him. In most seasons that weren't tied to the books, Gordon's episodes tended to be the strongest as they were always about themes of redemption and proving oneself in hardship. In the bland-ass hit era, Gordon's episodes were always the best ones because of this exact reason. The particular characters they have Gordon predominantly interact with is also worth mentioning. Gordon is one of the major characters who has some sort of relationship with every other major character in some way. Some character pairings that seem incredibly obvious on the surface have never happened. Would I blow your mind if I told you that Edward and Toby have never had an episode together? How about James and Emily? Or Toby and Duck? Weird, right? Gordon has had episodes with every major player at some point. Even the most significant side ones. When they brought Rebecca in, they were very clearly trying to do something with her and Gordon, even though they never really did much with it. Gordon also has the rivalry with Spencer, which is one of the longest ongoing rivalries in the show, and the only one that actually comes to a satisfying end. God, I love that episode. Who does Nia share her first episode with? You guessed it. And of course, Flying Scotsman. One of the very few real-life engines brought into the series, and they directly tie him to Gordon.
This is my brother. They call him the Flying Scotsman. Indeed they do.
Gordon is just the most interesting of the main bunch because he has the most special ties. They can take Thomas around the whole goddamn world and into space if they want, but he'll never be the most interesting. And even in a show with Thomas's name plastered on it, Gordon still manages to outshine him. Gordon is this series' representation of life, the symbolic start and end. Through him, we experience the eagerness and fearlessness and scrapes of young adulthood to the harsh reality of getting old and that you will meet an end someday. Life is a beautiful thing that no one truly understands until the end, full of moments high and low, with every person you meet along the way shaping the journey. And it's pretty damn remarkable that a fucking blue train with a face showed us that.